the June installment of the Client Feedback Tool Education Series. Thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day to spend some time hearing from Stan Phelps about some great ideas. We look forward to sharing them with you. Before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you are new to the GoToWebinar platform, you will find a control panel on the top or right-hand side of your screen. If it's a big panel blocking your view of the content, you can press the right-hand arrow button, and it'll collapse that menu and hide it out of your view. If you just have a tiny little toolbar over off to the side, you can press the left-hand arrow and expand out the control panel. That control panel will allow you to pose questions, which we encourage you to do all throughout the webinar. We will collect those and save them for Stan towards the end when we have a dedicated Q&A session. I see some of you on the registration list for today's webinar spent 2 days with us in Durham, North Carolina last month at our second annual CXPS, Client Experience and Professional Services Conference. Those who were there know that Stan Phelps gave our opening keynote. That was absolutely fantastic, and the feedback we've collected has highlighted that as certainly one of the key moments and favorite sessions of the conference. Those of you who maybe heard about CXPS and weren't able to attend, we wanted to make sure we brought you the best of the best to hear a little bit of a recap and get a sense of what we talked about and what things we learned at the Client Experience Conference last month. Next month in the webinar series, I'll be doing a broader recap of all the sessions, curating and collecting some of the best ideas, so you'll be able to join us again next month and hear some of the other great things that we all learned. Please do ask questions. Stan Phelps, our speaker today, is four-time author of the best-selling Purple Goldfish series. We have about a dozen autographed copies of his book, and those of you who ask a question will be receiving a complimentary copy. I know Stan has some intro slides, so I'll let him do a more proper introduction of himself, but as the organizer of CXPX 2016, I invited Stan because his message is so on point for the stuff we care about, I know you care about, taking care of your clients, really differentiating and creating an impact in your business. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stan and look forward to hearing all of your questions as we go through. Stan, take it away.
Great, thanks Ryan. And I want to thank everyone first off for taking the time out today. You all have a choice and you've chosen to spend a little over an hour, and I appreciate that. And I'm hoping this is going to be a great use of your time. A little background on myself. Over the last 7 to 8 years, I've really dedicated myself to studying how companies get to the heart of their customers and their employees. And so as Ryan mentioned, I write books. I've had a chance to do a TED Talk. I write for Forbes. And I had a wonderful experience last month at the CXPS conference. So I would recommend one of the things that was near and dear to my heart, that it was right in my backyard. I live in the Triangle here in North Carolina. And what I shared when we were in Durham last month is really what we're going to cover today. And it's the idea of a thing I call the Purple Goldfish. And it's really about how do you win clients and, more importantly, influence great word of mouth. And it's by doing the little things that I believe that can make the biggest difference in your business. I want to start out with a story just to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about. And this story happens to be of Brandon Cook and his grandmother. Now this picture was taken about 4 years ago Brandon was visiting his grandmother in the hospital, and unfortunately, she was down to her last few days. She had pancreatic cancer. And one of the horrible side effects of having pancreatic cancer is that it truly messes with your digestive system. And she was getting to the point where she could literally no longer eat. And here's her grandson, Brandon, kind of pleading with his grandmother. And finally, she looks at Brandon and she says, "You know what I would really like, Brandon?" She says, "I'd really like a bowl of soup." But she said, not the crap that they serve here at the hospital. She says, "What I would really like is a bread bowl of clam chowder from Panera." Now, I mentioned this happened 4 years ago. It was the summer of 2012. Here was the issue. This was a Monday. Panera only serves clam chowder in the summers on Fridays. But Brandon, being the millennial he is, he simply takes out his smartphone, and within minutes, he's on the phone with the manager at the Panera in Nashua, New Hampshire. And he explains the situation to Sue, the manager, and Sue doesn't even let him finish. She says, "Brandon, stop." She says, "Come on down to the restaurant. We'd be more than happy to help you and your grandmother out." And so Brandon drives 10 minutes down to the Panera. Sue greets him and the staff greets him. And they give him a couple bread bowls of clam chowder for he and his grandmother. In fact, they even go the extra step. They give him some free cookies for he and his grandmother to share. And Brandon goes back to the hospital and he has a wonderful lunch with his grandmother. This kind of, the clam chowder kind of really sustained her, and it made her happy. And as Brandon is driving home that afternoon, he thinks to himself, you know, that was just a little thing that Panera did, but it meant so much to him and his grandmother that he decides he's going to write about that experience when he gets home that afternoon. Now, we know Brandon Cook is a good kid, mainly because of this. He's friends with his mom on Facebook. Now, his mom sees Brandon's post. She copies it. She places it here on Panera's Facebook page. And that's when something pretty magical happened. Because just 2 weeks later, when somebody pointed this post out to me, I was the 810,000th person, 801st person to be exact, to like this post. This single post got nearly 36,000 comments on it. Many of those comments coming from Panera's own employees that said, "This is the reason why I work here at Panera." And I love this story because it really tees up this idea that a little thing can truly make a big difference. And I'm gonna go back here for a second. Why do you think that nearly 1 million people physically like this post? Why did this touch so many people so deeply? You know, I would like to think that if I was the person, I was the manager at Panera, and I got that phone call, that I would have done the little something extra. Maybe even been thoughtful enough to do the cookies. But here's what I know as a customer and what I experience every day, is that what we may see here in this Panera story, we may see that as common sense. It's definitely not common practice. And I would argue that there is a greater reason why people responded in this way. And it's simply this. We as humans have evolved and are hardwired to be able to respond to these types of things. The way our brain developed, and by the way, my wife calls this my Homo sapien brain, the way our brains have developed over hundreds of thousands and millions of years is that everything we come into contact with, we have to ask in a split second, two questions of anything we come into contact with. And our survival actually depended upon it when we walked out of the cave. Everything we encountered, one, we had to say, what is the intent of this person or thing that I'm coming into contact with? And then two, what's their ability to carry out that intent? So one, what's the intent? And two, what's the ability to carry out that intent? If you break that down, that's simply warmth and competence. And every day our clients are looking at us through those two lenses. What's our intent and what's our ability to carry out that intent? Now it turns out we can look at brands, we look at people and brands the same exact way. And I want to take a few minutes just to go through a few examples here to bring this to life. Now if you think about it, if you put this into a matrix, you can be seen if you're a brand as either high warmth or low warmth, or high competence or low competence. And so if we think about BP as a brand, where would you put BP in this quadrant? Now I think most people when they think about BP, they immediately think about Deepwater Horizon and what happened in the Gulf and how the company addressed that issue. And if you're like most people, you look at BP and you go low warmth and low competence. Now how do we feel when we come across somebody who doesn't have great intent or doesn't have great ability? How do we feel when we come across an experience with someone like that or a brand like that? It almost triggers a sense of anger or disgust in us. So that's BP. Let's think about the U.S. Postal Service. Now, the USPS, let me tell you a personal story. I love my postman. His name is Joe. He's awesome. He's always on time. He brings dog biscuits for my dog when he comes up in the little Jeep that he rides in. He'll give us tips on how to garden, get rid of weeds. He's an awesome guy. Now, all that being said, if I needed to get a package from North Carolina to Los Angeles tomorrow, am I going to go to the U.S. Postal Service? Probably not. So I think you could make an argument for the U.S. Postal Service, high warmth, but low competence. It's a brand that tries hard but just can't seem to get it done. And for those brands, you actually feel bad for them, almost a sense of pity. You could put a VA hospital in this quadrant. You could put Amtrak up in this top left. They try hard, but for one reason or another, they can't get it done. How about a brand like Rolex? I would say Rolex makes a great product, but they're very exclusive. They're not high warmth, but they make a tremendous timepiece. You'd probably put them in the lower right. And for those brands, it may evoke a sense of jealousy or envy. But here is where Panera really shined. What they did through that one example and how it spread throughout millions of customers is that they showed that they were both high warmth and high competence. And those brands, the ones that can get to that top right, by doing the little things, are the ones that you take pride in doing business with. The brands that you tell your friends and your colleagues about. the ones that go above and beyond both warmth and competence-wise. So that little story of Panera and warmth and competence really sets the framework for this thing called the Purple Goldfish. Now, my hope is you listen to the rest of this webinar, you're thinking about two things. Here's the first. I'm hoping you're thinking about, for the business that you're in, whether it's legal, whether it's accounting, whether it's architecture, whether it's engineering, whether it's design, that you're thinking about how you can apply these principles to your business. But more importantly, I also want you to look into the mirror and think about it, how do I apply these things to myself as a leader? And as that individual that people are looking at from both a warmth and a competence perspective. Great, so we're going to talk about this thing called the Purple Goldfish. A little bit more about myself. I run a consultancy called 9-Inch. No reference to me whatsoever. It's a reference to everyone that's on this webinar today. It just so happens that 9 inches is the average distance between the stem of our brain and the top of our heart. And kind of a neat fact as well, it is also, for about 85% of men and women, the distance between your thumb and your pinky is 9 inches, almost to a 16th of an inch for about 80 to 85% of people. Now, the work that I do at 9-Inch is simply this. How do I help the brands, how do I help companies get closer to the hearts of the clients that they serve and the employees that they have? And how do I go from them thinking about focusing on just the eyes and the ears of prospective clients and generating impressions, interrupting people, trying to get their attention, to actually turning that focus towards the clients that they already serve and creating experiences for those clients that help them bring the clients that they actually want. Now, why do I think focusing on the clients that you have is the end-all and be-all of business today? Well, it's not just me that's saying it. In fact, Gartner came out with research last year. They said by 2016, where we are right now, 89% of companies will compete mainly on the basis of the experience that they provide to their customers. They're going to compete. That is the main thing that they're going to compete on, is that client experience and customer experience. Now, to put that in perspective, you only have to go back 5 years ago to 2011. That number was 36% on client and customer experience. That gives you a sense of how important this is going forward. Now, here's another thing. Gartner came out with additional research. They said if you could just keep the clients that you serve, if you could just reduce your churn by 5 percentage points, that's going to equate to a bottom line increase in profit by 25% all the way up to 125%. So to put that in perspective, if you retain right now 75% of your clients, that's 3 out of every 4 clients will come on for another engagement or another project with you. If you could simply raise that from 75% to 80%, 4 out of 5 clients that stay with you and do another engagement, your bottom line profit would increase 25% to 125%. Now, it's not rocket science why this makes sense. Because if you take care of the customers that you have and they decide to come back, they're also going to do something pretty magical if they're happy with the experience that they've had. And they're going to recommend you to colleagues and friends. Now, one of the biggest myths, I think, in business is that most businesses think that all clients are created equal. If you get a client that comes to you because they've read a white paper or they saw an online advertisement for you or a billboard, that they're the same value of somebody that actually walked through the door because they've been referred by someone else, that's the biggest myth. They're not equal. They're not anywhere near equal. A referred customer is worth upwards of 4 times the value as a customer acquired through traditional means. Now, why 4 times? They're worth 4 times the value because over their lifetime, they will typically stay longer as a customer and they will spend more money because they've been referred, up to twice the amount over the lifetime of their time with you. Because they've been referred themselves, they will also refer up to twice the amount of people than a regular customer. And that's where you get the 4x. Now, this screen is black because I've got to tell you, I have a confession for you because my first 20 years in marketing, everything I did as a marketer was about eyeballs and earlobes. I did things on such a grand scale, they were designed to be a PR stunt, to get people's attention, to drive them to the 10 o'clock news or be on the front page of the newspaper. I want to share a few of those with you. I helped create, a few years back, the world's largest logo. It was done for KFC out near Area 51 in Nevada. The world's largest logo. I know it was the world's largest logo. In fact, you could see it from space. How do I know we could see it from space? Because we shot it with the Google satellite. This single campaign drove 650 million media impressions. It was a worldwide kind of phenomenon. It won awards. It did great things. I've also done things like float a 60-foot Statue of Liberty, M&M Statue of Liberty, right into New York Harbor, right in front of Lady Liberty herself. Now, this was a program I did for M&M's and Mars to help launch a new website where you could create your own avatar of yourself as an M&M. I'm a big coffee fan, so this was fun. I recreated and rebuilt the original Starbucks in Bryant Park in New York City for 1 day. This stunt was to help launch their everyday coffee, which is called Pike Place Roast. In the words of Howard Schultz, who's the CEO in this picture, this was the loudest and the largest marketing event that Starbucks had ever done. I did things like put a 40-foot Viking ship into Times Square for Walmart. This was to launch all of the merchandise for the movie How to Train Your Dragon. Now, when I did this event, I thought to myself, this type of marketing is not sustainable. It's not scalable. And I really thought I may have went too far. But it wasn't until I did this next program. I did a program for the brand, I Can't Believe It's Not Butter. And I actually gave away, believe it or not, a Mediterranean island with Fabio. This was right in Times Square. And I thought to myself, this is too much. I said, marketing and the way that we operate as business has got to change. And it wasn't until a night about 7 years ago, a summer night like tonight, that I here I am in New York City in one of these very nice rooftop bars, enjoying, as you only can in New York City, a $14 beer. And I'm with a colleague from the agency I worked with. We're just about to go to a networking event. And I noticed that there's an older gentleman sitting across from me at this rooftop bar. Now, every once in a while, I can see him scan the room. He's by himself, and it's obvious to me that he's waiting for someone. And for about a half an hour, he's on his own, and I can see him scan the room. I start feeling bad for him. And I lean into this older gentleman, and I go, "Excuse me." I said, "You know we spend 10% of our life waiting." And he looked at me strangely, and I looked at him and I said, "Look, I know it's true because I once read it on the internet." And he looked at me and he laughed. He says, "I am waiting for someone." I said, "Well, they're obviously not on time." And this guy said something to me that changed my life. He looked me straight in the eye and he said, "On time?" He said, "No one is ever on time." And I remember being stunned. I said, "Well, wait a second. I've been on time before. Not often, but I've been on time before." And he raised his finger at me and shook it in my face, gave me the typical Dikembe finger wave. And he said, "No." He said, "On time is a myth. Nobody is ever on time." He says, "People in life are either early or they're late. No one is ever on time." And it was like it hit me like a ton of bricks, because that same to the clients and the customers that we serve every day. No one ever just meets the expectations of a client. No one exactly fulfills everything just to the expectation level. You either exceed expectations or you fall short. And I thought to myself, there's got to be businesses out there that are consciously thinking about, how do we do the little things that will improve the experience that we provide and provide us with happy customers. And so I started to look for companies that did this, and I got excited when I came across Wells Fargo, because Wells Fargo absolutely gets it. You see, the average banking customer has just over two financial products with the bank that they bank with. It could be a checking account, it could be a savings, a mortgage, a credit card, a little over 2 products per customer. Wells Fargo, the customers that they serve, their customers have on the average almost 6 products on average. And what Wells Fargo knows, that it costs about 1/10 the amount of money to take care of the customers that they currently have, as opposed to try to chasing and acquiring new customers. That's 10 times more expensive to acquire a new customer than it does to upsell a current one. Then I came across these crazy guys 6-7 years ago. When all of the other airlines decided to charge for checked baggage, Southwest said no. They said, bags fly free. And in that one move, they decided to compete on the value and the experience that they provided to their customers. And instead of being a low-cost leader, they went back to competing on value that they provide. If you need to cancel your flight, are there any cancellation flights at Southwest? No. Are there change fees? No. All of the little things that they do that make them stand out from the other airlines. Then I came across this guy. This is Tony Hsieh. Founded Zappos. Did something that people at the time told him never would be able to be done. There is no way that you can sell shoes online. Tony Hsieh built $1 billion a year business in less than 10 years at Zappos, with literally spending $0 or no dollars on traditional marketing and advertising. What Zappos did was invest back into the customers that they had, and they did the little things to stand out and get people to refer them. Think about the things that Zappos does. Free shipping both ways. Up to 1 year to return your product. When you call up Zappos, there are no call times. They simply do the little things to improve the experience that they have. But I thought to myself 6+ years ago, there has to be other companies out there that are doing the little things. And so I ended up launching a crowdsourcing project called the Purple Goldfish Project. And I set out to find examples of companies that did the little extra for their customers. And I decided to get 1,001 examples. Now, why do I call it a purple goldfish? Let's start with purple first. Purple is a reference to this iconic American city. And of course, the city that I'm talking about, New Orleans, and the reference is to its most famous event, which of course is Mardi Gras. You see, purple is one of 3 official colors of Mardi Gras: purple, green, and gold. And the reason why it's a reference to New Orleans is that there's one word that comes from New Orleans that exemplifies this entire concept. One word that's a practice in New Orleans that I think has the ability to change the way people do business. One word, in fact, that Mark Twain once said almost 140 years ago, that is worth traveling all the way to New Orleans to get. That one word is called lagniappe. Now, lagniappe, it's a Creole word, French and Spanish in origin. It literally means the additional gift, or from the Peruvian, yape, which means to give more. And if you're down in New Orleans, it's customary for a business to do a little something extra for the customer. A little something that goes above and beyond just the transaction to actually honor the relationship that you have, to show that sign of warmth and competence. A little thing that I believe that can make a huge difference in your business. So that's why purple. Now, why a goldfish? The goldfish is a reference to a hotel chain here in the U.S. called Kimpton. And if anyone listening right now has stayed at a Kimpton property, you'd be shaking your head going, I know what you mean, because these guys get it when it comes to the customer experience and doing the little extra. Any Kimpton property that you stay at, there's always free gourmet coffee in the lobby. They do fresh fruit. In the afternoons, they do wine tasting. The hotel chain is pet friendly, so if you've got a dog, bring your dog along. They're super pet friendly. But here's my favorite. If you're staying at a Kimpton property, maybe you're there for a couple days on business, you're getting a little lonely, Kimpton will give you a pet goldfish for your stay. They call it Guppy Love. And I love this as a signature thing that Kimpton does that gets people talking about the experience that they've had at the hotel. The hotel encourages you to actually name your goldfish. They'll even feed it for you during the stay. How could you not tell anyone, how could you not put that on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook if you had your own pet goldfish during your stay? And I love that as a little thing that stands out. But here's the deal. The goldfish has actually a bigger meaning for me because maybe like some of you on this phone call, it was my very first pet. And this is a picture of me with a lot more hair when I was 6 years old. You know, I was so proud, I won that goldfish at a carnival when I was 6. And I remember bringing it home in the plastic bag thinking that it was the coolest thing in the world. And come to find out, it made an impact on me. And what I've come to find out, and I remember the goldfish that I won being fairly small, it turns out that the average goldfish is about 3 inches in length. That's the average. Well, when I've done a little bit digging and looking out there, I came across the Guinness World Record for an ordinary goldfish. That's nearly 20 inches. 6 times the size of an ordinary average goldfish. Think about that for a second. That would be like walking out of your office right now or your home and bumping into somebody who is 3 stories tall. I mean, how can there be such a difference between that average ordinary goldfish to the left and its monster cousin to the right? Well, it turns out the growth of a goldfish is affected by 5 things. And here's my challenge to you as you think about your business, whether it's average or whether it's potentially 6 times larger than your competitors. The growth of your business is determined by these same 5 factors. So let's look at all 5 factors. Here's the first thing. The size of the goldfish and the growth of the goldfish is going to be affected by the size of the bowl or the pond that goldfish is in. So think about it. If you're in business, what's the size of the bowl or what's the size of your pond? What's that akin to if you're in business? The size of the bowl or the size of the pond if you're in business is simply this. It's the market for the product or the service that you provide. And it makes sense. The larger the market or the larger the bowl or the pond, the more you can grow. So the first thing is the size of the bowl, the market. Here's the second thing. The number of other goldfish that are in that bowl or pond will also affect your growth. And this is an inverse relation if you're a goldfish. The less goldfish that are there, the more you're going to be able to grow. The more goldfish, the less. The more struggle, the more difficult it's going to be to grow. So if you're in business, this is a layup. Who are the other goldfish in your market? Simply this. your competition. The third thing, the quality of the water that goldfish is in, whether it's the bowl or the pond, will also determine how big it can get. The amount of nutrients that are in the water, the clarity, how cloudy that water is for the goldfish will impact how it's going to grow. So think about this. If you're in business, what's the equivalent? What are the nutrients and the clarity of the water if you're in business? And here's what that is. It's simply this. It's the economy. Think about the nutrients, maybe the ability to get capital to grow your business. Think about the clarity of the water. It could be things like consumer confidence, how that's going to affect purchasing. The economy is a big factor when it comes to growth. Here's the fourth thing. How that goldfish does in its first 4 months of life will determine how big it can get. How it does in those critical first 120 days will be a factor of how ultimately large it will get. A baby goldfish is minute when it's born. In fact, it is so small, a baby goldfish is called a fry, as in small fry. It is minuscule. So if you're in business, what's the first 120 days of life? It's simply this. Either if you're in startup phase or if you have a new product. So I mentioned there's 5 things that impact the growth of a goldfish. So let's review them. The size of the bowl or the pond, which is the market, the amount of other goldfish, which is the competition, the environment, the cloudiness and the nutrients that are in the water, that's the economy, and your first 120 days of life. Whether you're a startup or if you have a new product or service, how it does in that critical time will determine how big it can get. Here's the 5th thing, though. Genetic makeup. Now, genetic makeup is simply what separates that goldfish. What is it born with? What separates it from all of the other goldfish that are in that bowl or the pond? That will also impact how big it can get, how it's separated or different from all of the other goldfish. Now, if you're in business, what is genetic makeup? That's simply this. It's how you're different, or the differentiation of the service that you provide to your clients. And think about it. I think this is probably the most important thing, because if anyone on this call has been in business already for 4 months, and I would assume almost all of you have, what do you have control over with those other 3 things? Do you have control over your market? No. Do you have control over your competition? Not unless you're buying them. Do you have control over the economy? I don't think so. The only thing you have control over is how you separate yourself and stand out. And that's why I think this 5th thing of differentiating and how you handle that experience is so key. It's how do you do the little things, the purple things that help to have you stand out. Now, I mentioned before I started this crowdsourcing project, and I collected 1,001 examples, and it wasn't easy. And taking advice that someone once gave me about cross-country skiing. And here's the advice about cross-country skiing. They say if you're ever thinking about doing cross-country skiing, here's the advice. Start with a small country. Now, I didn't take that advice. I started the project back in 2009. and I started collecting examples. People would send me things that happened to them. I would write about those experiences. And it took me 27 months to get to. Now and in fact, it ended up shaking out that there's 12 different ways. And by the way, not just one thing. What I found, and I have about 50 companies that are in my Hall of Fame, Purple Goldfish Hall of Fame. They just don't do one or two things. They do a multitude of things. And it turned out that 6 of them are in a category that I call value. And value is simply this: what do you do for the customers that you serve? And what do you provide to them? It's more of the what. Whereas the second 6 are in a category that I call maintenance. What is it like to do? Maintenance is all about what is it like to do business with you? Are you easy to do business with? Is it enjoyable? And the goal, I think, is to be seen by the clients that you serve as a company that provides high value, but at the same time is seen as low maintenance. High value and low maintenance. Now, we don't have time during this webinar to go into each and every one of these examples, but I want to give you an acronym as you look at your business on how you might think about putting this idea of the purple goldfish and bringing it to life. So the acronym I want to give you is called GLUE. And the G in this acronym of GLUE is about giving. Now, I've told you what a purple goldfish is. I would imagine at least half of you on this call have stayed once in your life at a DoubleTree hotel by Hilton. And if I tell you what a purple goldfish is and I say, what's DoubleTree's purple goldfish? What would you say? And almost 9 out of 10 people that I talk to immediately say the chocolate chip cookie. Now, not just an ordinary chocolate chip cookie, mind you. This is a warm chocolate chip cookie. It's large, it's individually wrapped, and it's packed with chocolate chips. And it's that great first impression when you check into a DoubleTree hotel. DoubleTree's been giving out their signature warm chocolate chip cookie since the mid-1980s. Last year in 2015, they gave away their 300 millionth chocolate chip cookie. These cookies are so good. My good friend Jeff Hazlett used to be the CMO of Kodak. He says he loves these cookies so much. He says he dreams about them when he stays at other hotels. They're that good. And the G in give is about the spirit of almost that expression of doing something above and beyond the transaction. So G is for give. The L in glue is for little. It doesn't have to be something big. In fact, many times the gesture in itself is what's most important, that you're going above and beyond, and not actually what you give itself from a warmth perspective. And again, it doesn't have to be something big. This is one of perhaps my favorite example out of all 1,001 that I collected. And it comes from the Twin Cities in Minnesota, from St. Paul, Minnesota, a place called Izzy's Ice Cream. Now, Izzy's does something pretty interesting for the customers that they already serve. When you go into an Izzy's Ice Cream and you order a scoop of ice cream, Izzy's will ask you to pick another flavor for free, and they give you a mini scoop of ice cream on top. Now that free sample of ice cream, that's the Izzy. You buy 2 scoops of ice cream at Izzy's, you get to pick 2 flavors. Now, one of the things I love, this is just a side story on Izzy's, is that Izzy's makes 140 different flavors of ice cream. Now, the freezer that they have can only accommodate between 35 and 40 flavors, which means if you have a favorite flavor at Izzy's, it's not anywhere near guaranteed that it's going to be it at Izzy's when you walk through the door. So the owner of Izzy's, Jeff Summers, did something very clever. He would ask each and every customer to say, what's your favorite flavor? And then he would ask them to give them their email address, their Twitter handle, and their Facebook address. Now what Jeff then did was genius. He put an RFID tag on the back of each new tub of ice cream. And he put an RFID reader into the case. And every 2 to 3 minutes, that RFID reader would scan the entire case looking for new flavors. And if it just so happened that your favorite flavor just got put into the case, within a minute, a tweet would go out to you, a Facebook message would go out to you, and an email would go out to you telling you that your favorite flavor is now at Izzy's. Now, I've heard of Pavlov's dog, but if that doesn't beat Pavlov's dog, I don't know what does. So we've talked about G for give, L for little. The U is for unexpected. Now, the idea of unexpected is that you want to do something to surprise and delight the clients that you serve. You want to try to go above and beyond what they expect. Now, why this is important is that if you can actually create an emotional response with the clients that you serve, our brains are such that when we have that emotional response, we flood our system with a chemical called dopamine. And dopamine is literally the post-it note for our memory. So when you can create that emotional response, you're creating something that becomes memorable. And when something is memorable and sticks, then you tell people about that experience. The example I want to share here for unexpected comes from Safelite Auto Glass. Now, Safelite specializes in replacing and repairing windshields for cars, car windshields. Now, you call up Safelite, you've got a crack in your windshield. What they do is they come to your home or office, which is super convenient. We talked about maintenance. They'll actually even send you a picture of the technician in advance of them actually arriving. But they come to your home or office, and if you've got a crack or a ding in your windshield, they're going to repair it. And what they do is they have this funky machine that they actually place over that crack. They then drill into the crack, and then they put an epoxy resin to fill the crack. Now, once the technician puts the epoxy into the crack, it takes 10 minutes for that epoxy to harden before the technician can take away that device. So during that time, that safe light technician typically will walk back to his or her van and grab glass cleaner, and they'll also grab a vacuum. And for the remainder of that time, they will clean the entire interior of the car. You walk out, not only does your windshield look like it's brand new, but now your car looks like it just rolled off the showroom floor. That's the surprise and delight of doing something that's unexpected. And when we have those things that are unexpected, we can't help but tell other people about our experience and create that word of mouth. So I mentioned GLUE is the acronym, G is for give, L is for little, the U is for unexpected. Here is the E. It's about doing extra and finding a way to go above and beyond what's expected. Now this example comes from Canada. It's a place called Nurse Next Door. And Nurse Next Door sends home health care workers into people's homes. Now, every once in a while, I imagine something happens, a scheduling mistake, there's some type of disagreement with whoever the help is. Essentially, Nurse Next Door makes a mistake. Now, what's interesting about Nurse Next Door is they do a couple unique things to try to cover and handle that mistake. The first is they write a handwritten note of apology to that client. The second thing that they do, and I think it's unique, is they send a freshly baked apple pie and deliver it to that client or customer. Now each year, Nurse Next Door spends about $2,000 with the local vendor buying pies. But they've done the research. They know that it saves their company upwards of $100,000 in potentially lost business because of the pies and the way they handle those mistakes. Let alone all of the negative word of mouth that they're avoiding by correcting that mistake. So I love that as an example of doing a little something extra. So I've given you the acronym. We've talked about some of the examples. What I'm hoping is that you're starting to think about in your business, in the work that you do in professional services, how are you thinking about these little things that you can do that will differentiate you from your competition and help you stand out in a sea of sameness? So Ryan, I'm going to kick it back to you for a second. We've got a little bit of time for some Q&A before I spend about 6 or 7 minutes closing with a couple final points and one last story. So why don't I open it up to you, see if we have some questions from the attendees.
Stan, thank you so much. I appreciate the great information you were sharing with us. I do hope the rest of you stick around for the Q&A session. If you should bail out a little bit early, please look for the feedback request coming from us following this session so we can get your feedback and continue to improve the caliber of content we bring to you. Although I think this is certainly a good high watermark for us. A couple of questions coming in right now, and again, please type them in to the GoToWebinar control panel. If you don't see it on your screen, there should be a little toolbar up in the top or the right-hand side with an arrow. Click on that, it'll fly out the tool panel, and you'll see a Q&A box. Don't forget, if you ask a question, we keep track of who's asking. We've got a free copy of Stan's book, The Purple Goldfish, autographed by Stan, and we'll get that in the mail to you this week. So a couple questions coming in. Stan, you shared a lot of examples out of the consumer world. Do you have any goldfish examples from business to business or professional services?
Sure. And first off, Ryan, I actually have a slide share that I did on some of the best B2B examples, and perhaps we can follow up with a link to that slide share. But maybe let me share a few examples that I think from a B2B example really stood out. And in full disclaimer, because I was asking a lot of just regular consumers to do this crowdsourcing, we all have many more transactions that we do as average ordinary customers as opposed to being in a business-to-business mindset. But let me share one that comes right from our backyard here in North Carolina. And it's a company that makes a lot of really great golf apparel and high-end apparel. It's called Peter Millar. And so Peter Millar is a B2B business. They're selling through retailers, and they do a couple of unique things when they send their shirts or shorts or the apparel that they make to their clients. And the first is this: whenever they send a box of product out to a retailer, they always include a little tin of mints that goes in the box, which I think is just a little thoughtful and signature thing that they do. But here's the thing that I really like that they do. Let's say they mail out 30 polos to a country club. What Peter Millar knows, Ryan, is that the first thing that pro shop at the country club has to do is actually go through and do an inventory of all of the product that's in the box. And what Peter Millar does, knowing that that's what the customer has to do, they take the invoice, which they have at the top of the box, and they pack the entire box in the exact order that is laid out on the invoice, which makes it, from a convenience perspective, so much easier for that retailer to do the inventory of that product. And I think this is a secret reason why they do it, because they take the time in the beginning to make sure it's in the box exactly how it is on the invoice, is that they make very few mistakes compared to their competition. And so that's just a fun example. The U.S. Open just finished yesterday, so that's my Peter Millar example. Here's a company called Image Brew. They're a professional service company. They do video production and work they're based out of Colorado in the Denver area. It's called Image Brew. And so when they do a video project or a big project for a client, you know, there's obviously the time when you finally deliver the project, or the big video that they're doing. One of the things they do to follow up and say thank you, and it's kind of obvious with a name like Image Brew, in addition to making videos, these guys are super passionate about making craft beer. So at the end of every project, what they do is they'll bring a couple six-packs or a case of beer to the client as a way of thanking them and following up at the end of that piece, that engagement. And I think that's a signature way that gets that client thinking about, hey, these guys care, they appreciate the business, and when it comes time for that next project, I would think that memory is going to be strong. And assuming the work is good, that they're going to get another call. You know, one of the types that came out of the project is what I call pay it forward. So how do you work with the clients that you serve to give back, to have a greater sense of purpose? And so one of the B2B case studies that I like comes from a place called Inciting Ideas. They're a consultancy. And one of the things that they do, they're passionate about microfinance. And so what they'll do is actually at the end of a project, they'll give $100 to like a Kiva or another microfinance fund, and they'll involve the client and let the client pick the entrepreneur in the developing world that they're actually going to help out. So it's a nice thing that they do on behalf of the client. It gets them involved, and it's a nice thing that they do to kind of pay it forward. Maybe one last example. Let me think of one more that I really like. There's an online firm called Woofu, and they're in the B2B space. If you need landing pages or forms that you need to put on your site, Woofu has kind of the solution for you. Very easy to embed their software, track all of those forms and whatnot, and landing pages. One of the things they do to follow up and say thank you, they actually do handwritten cards. And they'll put stickers on the card. It kind of really embraces the personality and fun that they have as a online startup. And they just do above and beyond to do those handwritten thank you notes. And I think the handwritten thank you note is literally a lost art. And it's so uncommon now that it can be that signature thing. It used to be a common thing. It's no longer common practice. So Ryan, that gives you about a handful of examples of companies that do B2B. I think I have another maybe 8 to 10 examples in that deck. And again, we can make that link to the deck as you follow up.
Okay, great. Thank you. A quick one here. One of the attendees missed writing down the rule number 5, goldfish rule. Can you recap that one just real quickly?
Sure. So that was, for goldfish, that was genetic makeup. So what's that goldfish actually born with from a DNA perspective and a genetic perspective that separates it from all of the other goldfish that are in the pond? And think about it, if you've got good genes, you're going to be able to grow much larger than a goldfish that has bad genetic or bad genes in terms of their makeup.
And thank you for that. This one's coming from Terry. Where do you start if you want to implement something like this in an engineering firm?
It's a great question. We all have clients that we serve. We all have processes that we put our clients through. I would think about, from an engineering perspective, what are some of the ways during a project that you might be able to keep your client abreast of how things are going? Some of the most clever examples in the book come out of a category that I call waiting. Waiting is inevitable in business, but how you manage that waiting process, and again, keeping them updated as they're going through certain parts of a project, I think is probably would be worthwhile, Terry, to spend some time on that. I think, how can you be convenient to do business with? I'm a huge proponent, and I'm not just saying this because Ryan and Ryan are on the line, but of what client feedback tool does. Because I talk about follow-up as a major thing in this book. In fact, there's an entire chapter dedicated to follow-up. But many times, you don't want to follow up when you're just finishing a project. Because by the time you're finishing, first of all, your client is on to the next thing, and two, you have no ability to potentially change the course or trajectory of how they feel about the project that they're in. So having a tool like Client Feedback Tool that allows you in a very simple and convenient way to touch base during an engagement and be able to course correct along the way, I think is invaluable. I would also think, again, we all have projects that have a beginning point and an ending point. And so, Terry, I would spend a little time to think about how do you make it convenient in terms of onboarding that new client, because that experience that they have in those first crucial couple weeks or first week of working together is going to set the tone for the rest of the project that your firm might do. And then second, what do you do at the end of each engagement to honor the business that you got and show appreciation to the client that you just served?
Great stuff, Stan. I think the last time someone called me glue was in elementary school with the I'm rubber, you're glue bit. So a lot nicer than from you. Thanks for that shout out. We appreciate it. I see three other questions, but two of them seem pretty similar. Is there a best time to identify the glue, such as the anniversary of your business or a change in the helm at the CEO?
I don't know if there's a best time. I would say this, though, and we're going to talk about it in kind of my wrap-up comments, Ryan, but you really just need to take an agile approach to this and go into it with a mentality of kind of testing and piloting things to verify that it actually is going to make a difference with the clients that you serve. So think about rolling out some things and trying things out, because the key here is that you want to do things in the areas that are most valued by your client. You want to be best at what they value most. So part of it, we're going to talk about this first D in what I call a 3D process, but is really taking the time to understand what makes your clients tick and what's meaningful to them. Because that's what you want to be great in. And I would also say this, also understand what they don't value. Because let's be honest, if you're going to do this correctly, you're going to have to free up resources. You're going to have to take time to do these things correctly. You can't do everything. You're going to have to, if you're strategic about it, make decisions of purposefully not being great or even be unapologetically bad at the things that your clients don't value. So that's a good example. I'm going to share one. I'm the head of a marketing organization, so I get the B2B versus B2C thing all the time. And I tell people when I get this question when I speak around the world, I said, look, think about it. Would this be much easier to do if I had 50 clients or if I had 10,000 clients? And the answer in this, people say, well, it's easy to do it if it's B2C. I personally believe it's much easier to scale and to operationalize it when you have much bigger projects and less clients in total. And at the end of the day, we're all humans. Whether it's a B2C transaction or a B2B transaction, we all pretty much react the same way. So I don't think there are different principles that apply to B2B as opposed to B2C. You just might have to spend a little more time to figure out what's the thing that makes you purple and stand out in your offering.
Great. Do you have time for one more, or do you want to move on?
No, let's do one more, and then I'll finish with my last couple points in the story.
All right. So question here, have you ever seen a purple goldfish become a distraction from actually getting business done?
Yes. I think what you have to realize is that I think the the table stakes in professional services is that you need to provide a very strong service to the clients that you have each and every day. I mean, that's table stakes. And to be honest, we are starting to live in an age of equivalency, so much so that that service that you provide, the level of expectation is rising all the time. And so I think, to your point, you can't let these little signature things that you do distract, again, what I consider table stakes that the client just expects. You can't let it distract from delivering that product or service. But that said, you have to understand it's maybe easier, assuming you're doing that great job, to do a little bit more around the edges to really make that transaction into more of a relationship. Because we live in a day and age that you don't want to be seen as just a transactional vendor. You want to be seen as a vital partner and an integral part of that business. So you're being brought in earlier, you've got input as things are being generated. You just don't want to be an order taker. But I think you have to earn that from a business perspective. And part of it, I think, is making that transition from just being transactional to having more of the relationship. And what do we do in a relationship? It's give and take. And so I think that's a great question, Ryan. It should never distract from the core of what you deliver.
Great. So Zachary, Terry, Megan, Rob, Rakesh, thank you very much for your questions. We'll, if we don't have your address, we will get that from you via email and get that book in the mail. There was one comment, not so much a question, that came from Tom. So Tom, for participating, we'll throw a book your way as well. I'll read Tom's comment and then Stan, turn it back over to you. Tom said, it seems to me that many of these things you're talking about for your clients would also apply to your employees. And Stan, if you're not familiar, there's a real labor war going on in architecture, engineering, construction, who tends to be most of the audience we have here today. Tom, sounds like a great thought, and I'm glad you put your internal glasses on as well for this information. So Stan, I'll turn it over to you. Those of you who do stick around all the way, thank you very much. And again, look for the feedback request coming from us following this program. Stan, take it away.
Tom, you hit the nail on the head. And here's what really surprised me. When I started to see patterns when people started sending me hundreds of examples, that a lot of the same companies started showing up. And when I started to study those companies, what became really evident to me is that they not only just got it for the customers that they served, but they actually got it for their employees. And for most of them, they actually put the employees first and the customers second. And so I think that's a genius thing. I think you should start every day of the week and twice on Sunday thinking about how you're doing this for your employees. And it was a revelation to me, so much so that my second book is called The Green Goldfish. And the subtitle of that book is simply this: Beyond Dollars. Knowing that beyond dollars, what are the 15 things that you can do that can drive engagement and reinforce culture? And so, so Ryan, I have another slide share that's focused on the green goldfish and the the whole employee side of the equation. So I'd love to put that in the webinar notes as well. But that is such a key thing. So I mentioned purple, green, and gold, so it ended up becoming a trilogy. I think what's also missed in business is the topic of the third book, which is the golden goldfish. And this is what so often gets missed, is the idea of a golden goldfish, meaning that all of your customers and all of your employees are not created equal. For most businesses, 80% of profitability comes from just 20% of the customers. For the employees that you have, 80% of the value that your firm generates comes from just 20% of your employees. And so that's what the third book is all about. Excellent. So I'm going to finish with just a couple final points and a closing, and then I know Ryan has something to bring us home. I speak around the world on this topic, and especially when I speak to senior executives, people that are higher ups at firms, they all shake their head and they go, we're already doing this. We already have customers that understand that we're providing a superior experience. Well, a few years back, Bain went out and they researched, they surveyed hundreds of senior executives. They said, how many of you are actually doing this? And it turns out 4 out of 5 raised their hand high and they said, check the box, we're already providing a superior experience. Well, Bain didn't stop there. Who did Bain ask next? They asked customers. And did customers agree? No. In fact, only 8 out of 100 said that the companies that they work with, any of them provide a superior experience. And it turns out there's this huge gap. And as Bain kind of pressed further to figure out why is there such a gap here, it turns out there's 3 reasons why this gap exists. Here's the reasons. For the first reason, 8% of those companies, it was a failure to design, meaning that they just weren't doing anything to try to go and give a superior experience. For 25%, whether it was people or process or resources, it was a failure to execute on delivery. So maybe they had some ideas, but for one reason or not, they couldn't operationalize that superior experience into the organization. Maybe it was because they didn't have employees that were engaged. But the overwhelming majority, 39%, it was because they failed to develop a capability that continuously renewed the experience they provided. Now this is the deal. Every year the expectations of the customers increase and the clients that you serve. If you're not continuously trying to raise the bar and to go above and beyond, if you're continuing to do the same thing project after project after project, you're going to fall behind. And so what I've developed, and I encourage people to think about, is what I call a 3D development process. And the first D is very internal focused. It's about thinking about who you are as a firm, how you want to set yourself apart to be different, and then also doing the discovery to validate what your customers want and make sure that what you want to become is valued by the clients that you serve. And once you know how you want to stand out and be different, then you're ready for the second D, which is the process of, it can be a fun process, of sitting down, thinking about what are the ideas that we can do to bring that differentiating thing, that little extra, to life. And once you've designed it, then you pilot it, you test it, you verify it, and only once you've verified that it gives you the results that you want, you then figure out the last D, which is deploy. How do you figure out how to be able to bring that throughout the organization, do the work that you have with your employees, make sure you have the process and the resources dedicated in order to adequately deploy it, and then immediately measure it and go back to step number one, which is discovery, and continue that loop going around and around and around. So I want to finish today with the last story, and it's a story of Walt Disney. You see, 62 years ago, Walt opened Disneyland. And just 2 years into Disneyland being open in 1957, Walt had an idea. Walt was an idea guy. And this was his idea. For the entire month of December, Walt wanted to do a parade right down Main Street. Now, to pull off this parade, to do the floats, the people, everything that was going to be involved, it was going to cost Disneyland $350,000 to pull that off. That's nearly $5 million of today's dollars. So when his accountants heard this, they flipped. The accountants and the finance guys immediately found Walt. They sat him down and said, Walt, don't do the parade. They tried to reason with him. They said, Walt, these people are already going to be in the park in December. They're not expecting the parade. They're not even going to miss it. Don't do the parade. Walt looked up at his accountants, looked them in the eye, and he said, that's exactly why we need to do the parade. See, here at Disneyland, we always need to give our customers more than what they expect. He said, because if we don't, and they decide not to come back here, it's going to cost us 10 times the amount of money to get them to come back. Walt won that argument, and they did the parade that December, and it has since become a fixture at every Disney park within the system. In fact, if you go to any Disney park today, the number one asked question at the theme park is this: what time is the 3 o'clock parade? And of course, people aren't asking actually what time. They're asking where do they need to be, what time do they have to show up. But you think about what sets Disney apart from almost every other park. That is one of their signature features. Walt actually had a mantra for doing the little extra. His philosophy was this: always exceed expectations. And he had a word for it. It was called plussing. And how do you do that little extra? So my hope as we finish today, you're thinking about your firm, you're thinking about what sets you apart from all of your competition, and you're challenging yourself to say, what's our parade? What's our chocolate chip cookie? What's our purple goldfish? Thank you.
Dan, thank you so very much. We certainly appreciate your participation. We are right at the 90 minutes, so great timing. As I've mentioned multiple times, do look for the feedback requests. Please participate. We have more books to give away than we do people who ask questions. So those who give us some great feedback and insights or pose further questions that way, we'll drop a mail in the book for you as well until we run out. Thank you very much. Until next time, we appreciate you taking some time with us. Bye.